Building control are getting a bit of a bad rap at the moment because people are blaming them for projects that have been signed off saying, well, it's got building control. Building control is much more of an overview than people understand. They're not there to make sure whether or not your shower tray is going to leak. Building control check whether it is energy efficient, whether it's certified, whether it's safe, whether the fire systems have been done. Since Grenfell, the industry has changed massively, especially in relation to fire. I have people complaining on site all the time about the difference between a 3mm gap and a 4mm gap on a fire door. If that fire door has got 4 or 5 or 6mm, that room will be full of smoke before the fire brigade get there. The difference is whether somebody lives or dies.
Welcome to Taking the Con Out of Construction, the straight-talking show that's changing the industry, one episode at a time. Small mistakes can cost big money, and even more in time. But a small investment in listening to this episode could help you avoid disputes, delays, and costly pitfalls, while giving you the know-how to stop problems before they start. Let's turn complexity into clarity and take the con out of construction.
Welcome back to Taking the Con Out of Construction. Up to now, we've referenced a whole cast of roles across the construction chain, but if you're still unsure who does what or how they slot into the bigger picture, this episode is for you. Michelle, with hundreds of people potentially touching one project and communication being so critical, how do you begin to make sense of who does what and why each role matters?
Well, obviously it depends on the project and the person, and no two people are the same. But I wanted to discuss some of the professions within the industry because a lot of people don't necessarily know who's who and what's what people are supposed to do. And obviously this is my opinion. So this is what I believe these professions roles are, but never really defined anywhere. And when you've got a team, you've got team players, people tend to merge. One of the things that I've done over the last 30 years probably is I tend to adapt to where the gap is. So I will see where there is a gap in the team, and I have a tendency, or have done in the past, to fill that gap. That's not always been conducive for me and often leads to burnout, but there are often missing points. This is more for either people that don't have experience in construction to have a think about what team they may need if they're looking. Because I know there's people that are following this podcast that are either looking to do projects, get into development, or have an interest in construction. So there's that aspect for them. But also people that have been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years potentially don't necessarily know what each professional is supposed to do and what the roles and responsibilities are. So it's beneficial for everyone to have a listen. And this is my aspect of it, but this is through 30 years worth of experience of working with people in the last 5 or 6, actually transforming failing projects and that kind of work that I've been doing. So I wanted to start obviously with a surveyor because I'm biased. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a qualified quantity surveyor. So I went to university, I did a quantity surveying degree. It's amazing how many people are shocked that I actually have a degree in quantity surveying, which is what I was. People are amazed. I've been amazed by it for years and I've never really understood it. And then I meet people that are now graphic designers and they did a history qualification at university. So it's kind of making a little bit more sense. When I did my degree, I went to Anglo Ruskin University in Chelmsford. It was great. The first year of my degree, most of the modules were similar or the same, and the group of us was quite varied. So there was people that were doing quantity surveying, building surveying, architects, structural engineers, anyone in the built environment. We all did primarily the first year because the first year is a little bit about contracts, a little bit about everything. So I did a bit of structural engineering, so I've got an understanding of structural engineering. I'm not a structural engineer, but I can understand what their responsibility is, what their job entails. I understand that you've got different types of forces that they need to look at, and so that I've got an idea of structural engineering. But obviously I'm not a structural engineer. The same with architecture, the same with building surveying. We all have the same foundation, or in the degree that I did anyway, we all did the same foundation. And there was a number of modules throughout the 3 years I think I was at university where we all integrated. For example, the law section, we all did the same law and we were all together for that, because obviously that's really, really important. Although my real experience with the legal side of things and contracts as a quantity surveyor has obviously gone leaps and bounds to that. That's been from additional courses I've done. I've done courses with the CIARB. I'm an associate member of the CIARB. So that is where a lot of my understandings come from adjudication, etc. And obviously experience working with professional practices and with a number of organisations over the last 30 years. So it's obviously developed, but we all had to do that at university. Most professionals within the industry have an understanding of the other trades. So I'm explaining what I was taught at university, but also what I've experienced over the last 30 years. I'm starting with surveyors because that's my profession, if I was to give one, is I'm a quantity surveyor. The difference between quantity surveying and building surveying, a lot of people don't understand. So quantity surveyors are often known as beam counters. There's also estimators, and I'm going to explain the difference between a quantity surveyor and an estimator because they are very different. So quantity surveyors, yes, originally it was about measuring bills of quantities, looking at what needs to be built, figuring out how much of the space area quantities required to build it. So whether that would be doing a takeoff, which means looking at a drawing and seeing how many plug sockets there are, or how many meters of concrete you need, or how much reinforcement you need, or how much drainage you need. There's that aspect of it. Although that's more in estimating now, and there are quantity surveyors that have moved to being estimators, which means they just do takeoffs and pricing of work moving forward. Estimators will also look at variations and they'll look at final accounts potentially, but ultimately estimators are very much more, this is what you want to build, this is how much you're going to need to build it, and they'll price it. Now, some of them will send out packages. But again, we discussed all that in tendering. But so you've got estimators and you've got quantity surveyors. So we deal with the costs associated. So it's cost control, the legal side of things. So preparing the contracts, executing the contracts, often writing the contracts. We'll deal with payments. So the whole money side of a construction project is dealt by either quantity surveyor. So you will have an assistant or junior quantity surveyor, you'll have a quantity surveyor, a project surveyor, which just deals with one project. You'll then have either a managing surveyor or a commercial manager, which is head up after that. And then you've got commercial director. And then obviously you've got CEO. Good quantity surveyors will work alongside an accounts department because ultimately one can't function without the other. I've found it baffling when I've gone into companies where the surveying team and the accounts team don't work together. And that's a recipe for disaster. Quantity surveyors are responsible for understanding how much the project is going to cost, but also partially responsible for selling the project, as it were. So agreeing their cost with the client. Okay, that could start with the estimator, but generally a quantity surveyor will finish that off. Or the estimator can. It depends on how those two functions, if there are those two functions, work within a business. So you're selling it to the client for that cost, but then you need to buy the works from the subcontractors to some, I'm using simplistic terms. So they need to make sure that they can get the works completed for less than that cost to obviously allow for overheads and profits of the main contractor or the subcontractor or whoever it is that they're working for. They're responsible for the commercial side of it. So the contracts, the cost, reporting back, but also often quantity surveyors are responsible for ordering all the materials, making sure plants on site, evaluating all of the subcontractors' applications and making sure they're keeping an eye on the total cost of the project, but also making sure that what you're getting paid by the client is adequate and making the profit and covering your costs and all the rest of it, making sure that costs aren't overrunning, making sure that you're buying the product to be delivered from the subcontractors in your supply chain within the budgets, looking at variations, changes, add and omits, that kind of thing. But you're also responsible for ensuring that your team, like your higher C-suite team and the business, that you're reporting costs properly. And this is where a lot of QSs go wrong. One of the mistakes quantity surveyors often make is not reporting costs properly, so they'll get overheads confused with actual site costs. You've got different levels of QS. So they start with project QS, assistant QS. You'll have a project surveyor, which means they just deal with that project. You can then have assistant, senior QSs, intermediate QSs, depending on the size of the business. You then can have management QSs or commercial managers, which is obviously the commercial manager generally manages the commercial team, which will normally have some form of admin, all the QSs, estimating. Sometimes project managers fall in that too. And then you've got commercial director, generally is how it works. And then obviously you've got the other C-suite executives. So that's what quantity surveyors do generally. In my opinion, quantity surveyors should be like accountants. They should save you as much money or more than what you invest in them. And one of the things I think is frustrating for me, particularly, is the amount of people that are doing developments and doing projects on their own property or work on their own property or building their own houses that don't have QS involvement, because ultimately that's what QSs are for. They are there to protect the commercial, so the costs of the project, and make sure that the client is safe commercially, contractually, etc. QSs will also sign off work. That's a QS in a nutshell. Now, a building surveyor is very different. A building surveyor is much more about the physicality of the building itself. Is it going to stay up? Is it going to fall down? Is it structurally sound? And they will often tell you how to rectify a problem or how to build something or how to get around an issue like subsidence or cracking, or there's something moving or something's not right with the building. They can tell you what's wrong with the building. They can also do valuations of the building. They can do assessments of the likelihood of, say, if you're buying a property, often the survey's done by a building surveyor. So I used to explain to it many, many years ago, the difference between a building surveyor and a quantity surveyor is a building surveyor is going to tell you whether the building's going to stand up or fall down or not, and actually deals with the elements, the physical elements of the structure itself. Whereas a quantity surveyor deals with the costs associated with that and the legal side of it and how much it's going to cost you to do that. So there are the differences between the surveyors. And lots of people go, oh, I've got a mortgage. I'm going to get a mortgage, so I need a surveyor's report. Can I see you in action? No, you can't, because I can go around as a friend and say whether or not there's bits and pieces and what you should do, but I can't write a report on behalf of a mortgage company because I'm not qualified, not insured, and I just wouldn't know how to do it properly. But I can walk in and go, well, actually, that's a problem. You need a structural engineer for that. That is not a problem. That's just a shrinkage crack. That, not too sure, you might need to get advice on it. But what I can do is saying, if that roof needs replacing, which I think it does, that's how much it's going to cost you. And I can also turn around and say, well, actually, the most effective way of creating what you want from this house, like if they want to do an extension or they want to do some adaptations or refurbishment, this is the most cost effective way of doing it. And they're the key things about the different surveyors. And then you have property valuation surveyors, which are different. They're from the real estate market, and that's a different qualification, a different degree, a whole different faculty, to be fair. So that's the difference between surveyors. And then you've got people that do land surveys, and we do all that in university. I remember doing it 4 weeks after having a C-section, which wasn't my greatest moment, standing in a freezing cold field in February, surveying trees and the girth of trees. Actually, I really enjoyed that part of it, but not something I wanted to continue as a profession because I don't like being outside and I don't like getting muddy and I don't like getting wet. But yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Quantity surveyors and building surveyors can do that. I've done it on sites many times, and there's lots of machines that can do it for you now. But you've also got surveyors that work in groundworks that are different, and civil engineering, and surveyors that work in civil projects and rail projects, and everyone has their specialty. And I wouldn't feel comfortable working on a rail project as a project surveyor because I don't have that experience. And they're different contracts. I mean, I've worked with NEC, IET, obviously JCT contracts. So they're all slightly different, and we're all educated the same. Some people will have different strengths. So when you're looking for a quantity surveyor or a building surveyor, it's finding out about whether their experience, their expertise match what you require. And that's one of the things that I think people fail on a lot when they're looking for professionals, is actually, does this professional's expertise match what I'm expecting them to deliver? And it seems like that's how it should be. And it doesn't seem like rocket science to me, but a lot of people miss that. So that's surveyors. Now, project managers is very difficult with project management, because you could ask 20, 30, 100 people what a project manager is, and they could probably all come up with a very different term on how to define a project manager. For me, a project manager manages projects. So that means that they are a bit more high level, but it depends on the size of the project and the size of the business. So on small projects, you might have a site manager that does the project management. So they manage the entire project. They are a site manager, but because it's a small project, there's no necessity to have somebody different or higher up. On bigger companies, you're likely to have a site manager. You may have two site managers. One of them might call themselves a project manager, but unless they're looking at the project as a whole from an off-site perspective, I don't necessarily see them as project managers, because project managers should be communicating with the QSs. They should understand what's happening with the project in whole. They should have an input with the client or the client's team, or whether that be the client's agent. They should have an idea of who's getting paid managing the program, whereas the site manager is about managing the site. So the site manager will be responsible for the health and safety, the sign-in, the toolbox tools, making sure that the welfare facilities are there, making sure that the site is safe, the team's there, everyone's got what they need, and actually manage and coordinate with the different trades and making sure that permits are issued and everybody's safe. The primary role of a site manager is to make sure everybody's kept safe, in my opinion. The project manager will support that and take that another level, and depending on the size of the project and the complexities and the individuals involved and their experiences, the project manager may also have a role with the health and safety. And you may have a health and safety officer, but it's unlikely, unless it's a huge project, like multi-million pound project with hundreds and thousands of people on it, that you would have on-site health and safety management, a whole team. So obviously it depends on the size. And I'm talking the under 25 millions kind of style projects where you may have a permanent project manager, but you might also have a contracts manager, which are slightly different because the contracts manager is much more involved with the QS side of things and the contract being run in contract administration and making sure that the team in a whole are giving the construction team what they need. A project manager will also do that. So they'll make sure that the designs are there, they're getting tech subs are issued, making sure that all the information is being communicated within the different teams, unless of course you've got a design manager. So this is overhaul. But there's also two very key things that a lot of people don't understand with project management is you have what I call contractor project management, which is on the build side, but then you also have professional project management. So I've done both. I have done professional project management when I've worked as a PQS within a PQS role in a PQS firm. And I've also done project management on site in construction, running the actual project and delivering the project while doing the commercial side of things. And I've done it on both on a number of projects. The professional side of things, project management, they start a lot further on. So in concept stage. So when they're first looking at ideas, and it goes from literally, we're looking to build something that's 25,000 square feet and we're going to build it at £1,500 a square foot, whatever it may be, from that aspect to developing it and developing. And then when you've got all the different design teams, so you'll have an M&E designer, you'll have an architect, you'll have an interior designer, you'll have a structural engineer, you might have an environmental designer of some sort, you might have geotechnical people, you might have heritage people, whatever. There's a whole team. And as a professional project manager, you will be responsible for managing that team. You'll also be responsible for managing the employees' agents, the contract administrator. You'll be the QS team on the client side, but also you're responsible for managing client. And that can be the most difficult part sometimes, and making sure everyone is delivering what they're supposed to be doing. It's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of chasing, it's a lot of emails, it's a lot of sitting and coordinating, but you're responsible for making sure that everyone has what they need in order to successfully deliver the project. Whereas project management on site is obviously still doing similar things, but you're looking at one person to give you the information on behalf of the client, whereas you're then distributing that amongst the internal team. So you will have plasterers, mechanical, so plumbers, electricians, you might have one M&E company, you might have painters, decorators, ground workers, steel workers, cladding companies. Project management is difficult, but it's about obviously managing the project and anything that's involved in that. But because it's not defined, that's often where I found gaps. So there's many projects that I've ended up doing project management or part of the project manager role as well as a QS role, because if the project isn't managed, I cannot do my job. But you also have a lot of difficulties between project managers, and any project manager listening to this is going to clearly be rolling their eyes at me or effing and blinding at me, because project managers and quantity surveyors battle because the project manager focuses on delivering the project on time, whereas that's not always possible within budget. And a lot of the time when something's not quite right, for whatever reason it may be, and I'm not saying it's project manager's fault, most of the time it's the client's fault, but if things aren't going there, especially when there are delays on site, the easiest way to recoup those delays is throwing money at them. And obviously as a QS, that's not what we like to do. I like to be different because I understand there's both, and the quicker the project is delivered, the less money there are on premiums and the costs are associated. So it's about finding balance of, okay, we've got this, actually if we bring the project forward or not have a delay, that's what the delay is going to cost us. So actually, let's try and reduce that and throw some money out to reduce that delay. And I look at things slightly different and work with my project managers, but it's very common for project managers and QSs not to get on. So for me, the most important roles in the project, because they will make or break a project. And when I'm coming in and doing crisis control, recovery of projects, or there is a major issue with the project, the first people that I need to speak to is the QS and the project manager, because they're the ones that know those projects inside out. And it may be the fact that one of them is a problem, and I interview them separately for obvious reasons. You can find out exactly what's going on in the project. And then obviously you speak to other people around it. And I don't just take one person's situation. Facts will speak for themselves, but often they will know whether it's been a subcontractor that's not been working properly, a supplier, whether the fact is that accounts haven't been released and the money's not been there, whether or not the funders aren't developing, whether the money for the project has gone elsewhere, whether it's my site manager or project manager or the client or whatever it may be. You will find out from those two people what's going on with the project between the two of them. That's where I always focus on. It's really important to make sure that you're employing the right QS or a QS and a right project manager for the success of your project. Architects. There are many different types of architect, and people don't understand that. There's different levels of experience and there are different levels of production of architect's drawings. So you'll have architects that will do concept designs. You'll have architects that will do technical designs, and there is a big difference. Some architects will design this beautiful building And a lot of the time there is lack of movement potentially. And they don't always like people like me, because ultimately I'll go, no, we can't afford it. It's not me that's saying you can't afford it. The client doesn't have the budget, doesn't want to pay for it. But I end up being the big bad wolf saying, no, you can't have that particular thing, and looking for other solutions. It's good when you work with architects that have got technical ability when required, because if you don't have the budget to have both, so you've got that beautiful idea and that beautiful concept, which is great for planning. So you'll have architects that will be amazing at getting things through planning, but actually can't tell you how to build it. And then that'll have to be progressed to a technical architect that can actually show you the features of how it's going to be built. What I would always recommend when employing an architect, depending on the size of the project, is the involvement of the design portion moving down. So if you've got a design and build project, you need someone that's got good technical skills that can be transferred over. But also, I always recommend that if you've got someone that will listen to the professionals. So I've worked with some incredible architects, and on certain aspects where the design portion, which is called CDP, so contractor design portion, is in the contract, we get the contractor that is most promising and we're likely to be going ahead with in a meeting with the architect to say there is a better way of doing it, whether that is speed, cost, product. And when you've got an architect that will work with the specialties, that's where the real magic happens, because you've got someone that's respecting it. And also you get to see the mastery of that subcontractor. But obviously that's on intermediate projects where you're talking between 8 and say 19-20 million pound projects. That's where a real beauty arises. So you need to make sure that you've got the right team. So that's what architects are there to design. Now, it's very, very common for an architect to be a contract administrator in a JCT. And a contract administrator is someone similar to that administers the contract. So they have a role within the contract. It's defined in every contract, but generally it means that they are responsible for signing off works. They are responsible for signing off scopes. They're responsible for looking at extensions of time, looking at variations, looking at instructions, and they sign the works off. Sometimes the contract administrator will issue a payment notice, for example, if you don't have a QS, which does work depending on the size of the project, but I'd always obviously recommend having a QS. But they work on behalf of the client. Now, in some projects, you'll have an employer's agent on top of that. That's generally a QS from a PQS firm. And they also act on behalf of the client and can issue instructions. But how those two roles operate depends on the contract and the size and the complexities of the project and what type of contract it is and that kind of thing. So they're the difference. Both of them work client side, so they work under instruction from the client, and they have a responsibility to advise the client. I remember working for a PQS firm, and I'd not had a lot of experience at this point working for PQS firms, and I got myself in a bit of a tiswas because I knew costs were going up and I was going to have to do a report to the client, and the cost had gone quite high. And with my main contractor's QS hat on, that puts you in an area of risk, because if the costs have increased, you don't have a formal instruction and agreement on those costs, that's when you're at risk because you've already committed to them. Sometimes the work's already been done. It's a scary place to be as a contractor. But as a PQS, I sort of had that same fear, and a very, very good QS, one of the best QSs I've ever worked with, sat down and explained to me very clearly, our role is not to reduce the cost of the project. Our role is to make sure that it's fair and reasonable, that our client is aware of the potential costs, that our client knows what their liability is, that our client is getting good value for money. But ultimately, if they buy more than they can afford, that's not our problem. What we need to do is make sure that they know what they're paying for and what the budget is likely to be, and so that they've got the opportunity to either not make any changes or make sure they've got the funding to sue. The control of how much the project is not down to us. We just need to report it so the client is aware. So if we see things that they're doing, or they've done an instruction, or there's delay and there's a cost associated to that, we have to highlight it and give a budget and say, this is what you're looking at. But also an idea, if they're looking at changing something, okay, this is the potential costing, but that's what we're responsible for. Whether the client's got the money to pay is not our responsibility. Obviously, there's a due diligence there, and there's a responsibility that if we were made aware that the client hasn't got money to pay and they're doing instructions, and obviously that's not ethical. But if there is a concern, then you can obviously look at proof of cost, etc. But I mean, that gets a little bit messy. But ultimately, reducing the cost just because the client doesn't want to pay them is not the role of PQS. that was really good to learn. And actually, I think that's benefited me immensely in my career, because I've never been afraid to say, this is how much this is going to be. Yes, you can have whatever you want, but this is the cost associated. And it's the same with my children. They want something. I know for one thing, they're prepared to pay for it out of their pocket money. If they're not prepared to pay out of their pocket money, they don't want it. I mean, obviously, my 5-year-olds don't really understand money yet, but my now nearly 20-year-old, when she was 9, 10, 11, 12, okay, you're going to pay for it out of your, no, don't want it that much, you're not having it. If she then said, yes, I'll pay for it out of my own money, and she really wanted this particular product, then sometimes I get it for her. Sometimes she pay out of her own money. But it's exactly the same with clients. Yes, you can have that, but it's going to cost you 20 grand, 500 quid, whatever it may be. You then understand whether or not the value of what they want is actually worth the cost and whether they instruct it or not. So you have employees, agents, and contract administrators that work on behalf of the client to make sure that the client is producing what they need to do. The client's other reps, like their architects and all their design team, are producing what they need to do for the successful delivery of the project. The client has a responsibility to make sure that the contractor has everything it needs to be able to deliver. One other thing I want to clear up, and I hope this doesn't get me any hate, is building control. The building control profession has changed dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. I think the catalyst was Grenfell, but there's always been a confusion on building control. And I've been on podcasts and I've spoken to people and I've seen comments where people have gone mad at building control or blamed building control because their hot tap was their cold tap and vice versa, and that the quality of the build was not right and they blame building control for it. Building control are not responsible for quality. And one of the things that I am going to say, which does frustrate people, but not as much as it frustrates anyone in the construction industry, if you are purchasing a property, you have an obligation to check that that quality of that property is as you expect it. It's not down to everybody else. Yes, there's snagging. Yes, the contractor is supposed to deliver. That's why you have a 2-year grace period to some extent to bring out snagging for items, because ultimately it's impossible to test every millimeter of a building. And also buildings move and they settle and things happen over time. And it's just impossible to have something totally perfect, because you'd be extending the build period for another year to test everything. It's not building control's responsibility to make sure that things have been installed properly. Building control's main concern is fire at the moment, but also making sure that the design meets building regulations. The building regulations are online. You can see them. You can figure out what they are. There's all different parts of them. Designers will often refer to a building regulation with a number. So you can look up the number and it could be part M, part L, part P, whatever it may be. And they are regulations within the industry. So a lot of them are to do with fire. A lot of them are to do with like waste, or there's the environmental impact, there's a disability impact. So, for example, doors have to be a particular wideness, staircases have to be a particular wideness in certain areas. You need to have accessible situations depending on the project. So building control are there to check and make sure that that's been aligned for, that the scope of works is right, the drawings are right, but they're an advisory capacity. So they have to go and have a look and make sure that the foundations have been poured in accordance with the regulations and the design. They will check that the fire doors have been installed properly. They'll have a look and say, yeah, that they've been certified properly. They have a look at the information. They have a look at warranties. They have a look at basic information that's collated and provided to them, including pictures, going on site, having a look for themselves to say that, yes, under their opinion, the project has been delivered in accordance with the documents and with building regulations. They're not there to check quality. The quality of the installation that is correct, yes, but they won't turn around and make sure that the taps fitting is working, or they won't look and make sure that all of their connections fit. They'll have a look. So, for example, I had building control on the site recently, and they said that the way that the joists had been bolted into the wall is they were 600 centres. There was a couple of errors. They thought that they were a little bit over 600. They wanted a few extra bolts just to make it extra safe. That was one of the things they asked for. That was done. They'll often say, we want pictures. Sometimes they go on site. It depends on the project and the complexities of the project, but they're not there to do quality. So quality signs off are either done by the architect, a QS, a clerk of works. Sometimes you'll have a quality assurance person, but it's never done by building control. And building control are just advisors. And they're getting a bit of a bad rap at the moment because people are blaming them for projects that have been signed off, saying, well, it's got building control. That doesn't mean it's of a good quality. So if you've had a door installed and it looks like it's met the regulations, they're not going to sit there and test the door. They'll make sure that the door, if it's a fire door, that it closes properly. They will look at that. But then you also have fire risk assessments and fire risk assessors, and that is their job and that role. So building control is much more of an overview than people understand. And yes, they'll check and make sure that door closes and that it's been installed properly, but they're not going to check to see whether the quality's in there. And if that door suddenly falls off in 3 months' time, or 6 months' time, or even a week's time, unless it was obvious at the time of their inspection, it's not down to building control, it's not their responsibility. So they do get a bad rap, and it's not really fair because a lot of people don't understand what building control actually are. And I think a lot of them have changed the way that they're even explaining who they are, and their job titles have changed. But I have people complaining on site all the time about the difference between a 3mm gap and a 4mm gap on a fire door. The difference is whether somebody lives or dies. And I have them whinging all the time, oh, it's this, it's that. It's like, I get it. But ultimately, it's the difference between live and die. So since Grenfell, the industry has changed massively, especially in relation to fire. And one of the things that have been implemented is that people to stay in their rooms, or if there's a fire door. So for a HMO, for example, this is obviously generic. So you need to check the regulations of your door and the fire exit strategy for the building that you're in. You're in a hotel, for example, they're always on the back of the door. If you're in big buildings, that often you'll have a picture of what the exit strategy and what the plan is. So if you can't get out of a building because there's a fire in the staircase or it's unsafe or whatever, or the policy is that you stay put, the building has been designed to withstand fire for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever it may be, which should be long enough for the fire crew to get to you. And in bigger buildings, the fire brigade are often involved in this and they have to sign it off before the building can even be occupied. Because of that, so the walls will have either 60, 90 minutes threshold, so the walls can withstand fire for 60 to 90 minutes, which means they have all their apertures closed. There's a number of products and it's very complex. There's a lot of design goes involved into making sure that works. With a fire door, the gaps around the fire door can be no more than 3mm. And the basic can be up to 10, but are on the top and the sides of the door, and they need to be threshold strips. And it's much more complex than I'm about to say, but basically the difference of whether those gaps are bigger is whether or not smoke can get from the corridor area into that room. And if the smoke can enter the room, that person will be dead before the fire brigade get there. And that is what's important. If that fire door has got bigger gaps and it's a 4 or 5 or 6mm, that room will be full of smoke and that person will be dead before the fire brigade get there. If it's only 3mm or below, it will withstand against smoke and that person will remain safe in that room with fresh air as much as possible until the fire brigade get there. That is the whole idea. And that is what FRAs and building control are all about. And ultimately, that is how the industry was. You need specialists. It is frustrating, I'm not going to lie. It's difficult to deal with. You've got Carr's guidance. It's not clear. I did a talk on AI and AI in construction, and I had an AI specialist that creates AI apps and is heavily involved in AI, and AI couldn't come up with a simple way of establishing what the rules are within the Carr's guidance because it's so complex. It's very difficult. So that is a key thing, and it's about whether or not a building is going to withstand a storm to some extent, whether it's watertight, whether or not there is ample air circulation, whether it is energy efficient or achieving the planning requirements through regular information, whether it's certified, whether it's safe, whether the fire alarm works, whether the fire systems have been done, whether it's installed to a professional standard, but it's got a certification. They don't go around and physically check all of the work. They check the certification from each of the trades that, for example, for NIC certificates, gas safe certificates, building warranties, that kind of thing. They check all of that information and say, yes, this is the information that we received in accordance with the guidelines and with the instructions. They're not there to check and make sure whether or not your bedpost or your shower curtain or your shower tray is going to leak or not. That's not what they're there for. The other important profession within the construction industry is around accountancy and finance. So many companies have gone in to fix or help or empower, and one of the issues that they're struggling with is they've got a financial controller or an accountant, or sometimes it's just a bookkeeper that doesn't have construction experience. Construction industry is a whole world of its own. It's got a whole legal system of its own. It's got acts of its own. Unless you've got experience in construction, you're going to struggle. One of the things that contractors, whether they be main contractors or subcontractors, don't do, which I think is an error, is spend good money on people controlling their finances. I think that is a very powerful place to be, and the most successful contractors that I work with or have worked with have a strong financial team that understand the construction industry. I've gone into companies where the accounts department don't even know what CIS is, which is a major thing in construction. So that is definitely underestimated. I think people know what financial controllers are, and I don't need to go into the different definitions of what a financial director is. One thing I will always advise, depending on the size of your project, if you can't employ one full time, get a fractional. I am a massive advocate for fractional directors, especially the commercial directors. I've done it myself. Don't do that much of it anymore. I'm more of an advisory role, but fractional commercial directors are worth their weight in gold. Decent ones, of course. Fractional finance directors are insanely brilliant. I know some amazing ones. If you need some referrals, please come to me. I know some incredible teams of fractional directors, and it's the way that the world is working now, and the use of the fractional faculty and service on all different things, sales directors, managers, whatever it may be. Fractional is amazing because you are literally getting the services of an exclusive, often C-suite executive for a fraction of the price because you're only there for the fraction of the time. So there is no excuse now not to have the right professionals. And the freelance market and the way that the whole entire industry has changed post-COVID, there's lots more people having their own businesses and stuff. There is no excuse now not to have the right professional. So when it comes to construction, and I say this all the time, you have to have the right professionals. They will make or break your project. And it's not just about one or two, it's about how they all work and looking at the project team as a whole and getting somebody that understands the different types of people, the different archetypes within the industry, how they interact with each other and where things are missing and where there's a gap in that professional body. But ultimately, you need to make sure that you're selecting a professional team properly. And if you don't have them and you're not employing them, then you should. And I hope that this has been helpful on the key attributes, differences with what you need and who you need, when you need them. And if you need any more guidance or anything explained on that, feel free to reach out to me or one of my team. I'm here to help.
When people understand exactly where they and others stand, projects stop stumbling and start flowing. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your insight and breaking down how these roles truly fit together across a project.
You're welcome.
If you found value in today's episode, hit subscribe so you never miss a new release, and share it with someone in the industry who needs to hear it. To learn more, access resources, or find out how Michelle Carr and Construction Alchemy can help you protect your projects, solve problems, and boost your profits, visit constructionalchemy.co.uk. Together, we can change the industry, one project, one company, and one episode at a time. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based on the personal experiences of Michelle Carr and her guests. They are for general information only and should not be relied upon as professional or legal advice. Always seek your own independent advice before making decisions. Neither Michelle Carr nor Construction Alchemy accepts liability for any loss, damage, or consequences arising from actions taken based on this podcast. Thank you for listening.